right. Hi, everybody. It is time for our weekly podcast conversation with WBZ legal analyst Katherine Loftus about the Karen Read retrial. Hi, Katherine.
Kristina.
I will tell everyone we are recording this on Thursday. I have a rare day off on Friday, so this does not include any of Friday's testimony. Apologies for people who look for that on Friday. We'll make sure to catch up on it next week as well. So this is
And that's for everybody listening. Kristina won't be here because she's graduating law school tomorrow and she's a valedictorian. So she's doing all this work for you guys on top of that.
Thank you, Katherine. Yes, I will be at my own law school graduation, so I won't be here, but I'll be back Monday. So let's go backwards.
Sure.
From where we are now until the beginning of the week. So right now, at the point where we're talking, Dr. Irini Scorti-Bello, the state medical examiner, is on the stand. She testified last trial as well. Anything you've noticed that's different about her testimony compared to the last trial?
Well, I think similar to a lot of the other witnesses, they just seem a little bit, they understand what kind of questions will be coming at them. I think she testified fine the first trial. A lot of times when you get medical professionals on the stand who, despite the fact that, if you're somebody who performs autopsies in situations like this, you obviously have to testify in, different cases, but it's not what they like to do. It's not their preferred, they didn't sign up to be a doctor to testify. So I think she comes across to me as she's really thoughtful in her responses. She takes her time in answering, I think, not in a evasive way, but really, kind of considering, hearing what the question is and answering. And, I think overall, this is one of those questions that goes right to the heart of the case is what caused John O'Keefe's injuries. And, what the defense is really trying to focus on is that because she could not really conclude one way or another what the manner of death which caused these injuries, she talked about the blunt force trauma to the head and the hypothermia, is ultimately a big factor for the defense, because even if the Commonwealth's own medical examiner can't point to what caused it, then maybe the jury shouldn't either. But overall, I think she's holding up pretty well. And she seems, she seems pretty reliable.
Right. I do remember this. I think this is different from the first trial in that she did say on direct exam this time that blunt force trauma to the back of the head was the primary cause of death and also hypothermia secondarily. And I think last trial she kind of said both and you can't say which.
So you may have a more clearer memory than me, but I'll take your word for it. So I think, hypothermia was not raised in the same way the first trial, if my memory serves correctly, as it is now. It seems to be an issue that's sort of come up over the last couple of months, since we have the new medical examiner testifying, or the pathologist testifying for the defense, and she's likely to opine something differently. And I imagine that's as a result of the line of questioning about not only the blood force trauma, but the hypothermia is really kind of anticipation of the other expert testifying for the defense. So ultimately it goes to, you wonder what the jury is taking from that. If, does it matter which one is the greater contributor? Is it, how deep are we going to get into hypothermia? If it was, 3 hours, would your body reflect, a certain kind of state? If it's 5 hours, would it reflect differently? So that's really what the defense is trying to point to, in that she can't specifically cite to what caused his death.
Right. And then just can you reflect on the impact it could have on the jury that the manner of death is undetermined? So she talked about the 5 potential manners of death as a medical examiner, and it's accident, suicide, homicide, undetermined, and I'm missing the 5th one, but the 5th one: accident, suicide, homicide. Oh, natural death. Natural cause of death, accident, suicide, homicide, and undetermined. And in this case, it's undetermined because she said she couldn't determine between accidental and homicide. What impact could that have on the jury, that the medical examiner she can't say this is a homicide?
Well, it's one of those, the manner of death is kind of tricky because in a way it almost comes to a legal conclusion, and if the medical examiner does not, if we look at it sort of from the opposite side, on the initial reaction is, how can we take this seriously if there isn't a manner of death?
Right.
But do we want the medical examiner making conclusions really of fact if she does not have the appropriate information to make that conclusion? So I think what she's saying is fair, is that, listen, I saw his body, I reviewed his records from the hospital, you know, the EMTs, what his body temperature was. I looked at the injuries, his organs, things like that. I was able to review the police reports, you know, but there's no witnesses to it. There's no, you know, there's no, it's different if you see somebody who is clearly, you know, has multiple gunshot wounds or stab wounds, or, you know, has taken their life by a, you know, in a certain manner, that it's readily apparent, that, I apologize if I just went out, it's readily apparent that what caused the death or what the manner of death was. So I think it's actually, it actually reflects a little bit of, it reflects on her ability to not come to a conclusion if she doesn't have all the information she needs. And I think that's really what we want in the system, even though in this case it makes it a little bit more complicated.
Yeah, you had, oh, forgive me, my phone's going off. You had predicted when we chatted recently kind of the direction that the Commonwealth case would go now. And you had predicted, you know, some more state troopers, the medical examiner, a crash reconstructionist, and then I think you said maybe like a more emotional witness to finish things off. I mean, so far you've been right. Do you still think that's how the case is wrapping up for the Commonwealth?
I think so. I think that we're really the primary focus from the Commonwealth's perspective is going to be on the injuries at this point. You know, we've talked about the elements needed to be proven for manslaughter while OUI, operation, intoxication, public way, recklessness, and then the final and most difficult prong for the Commonwealth, and really is the crux of this case, is, did Karen Reed cause these injuries? And that's what really the bulk of the remainder of the testimony is going to be. Anything else is, you know, it really is just going to go to sort of, I think, after the accident reconstructionists and the medical examiners, it will really go to kind of humanizing the story again, because, you know, sometimes it gets difficult for a jury when you get wrapped up in sort of, you know, the intricacies of the police work or what an expert's saying. And so at the end of it, the Commonwealth will want to remind the jury that this is a human being who lost their lives, they have family, things like that. But I do expect that, you know, we might wrap up, depending on how long cross-examination goes, because cross of expert witnesses can take some time. But I think after Dr. Scodini Bello, we'll probably see, I don't know in what order, if we'll see the accident reconstructionist and then the neurosurgeon, or vice versa. We don't know if we're going to hear from the ring keeper of records, if that has anything to do with what he's going to put in. But I think we're on the path towards the end of the case.
And then I just remembered the one other thing I think that they still will probably have is the people from the crime lab who actually tested the DNA and everything.
Yes, so that's how, and that's why I wonder after, if after the ME finishes up testifying, likely today, if maybe he'll go to the accident reconstructionist and then to the neurosurgeon. It seems Attorney Brennan doesn't like to call witnesses who are really testifying to the same substance back to back. He sort of likes to sprinkle in a little bit of, you know, testimony and evidence through one witness, and then maybe, you know, stay in the same general vicinity, but not exactly there. So, you know, I think that the testimony from Maureen Hartnett was really to establish the baseline for how the evidence was collected, you know, what specifically was scraped off of the sweater, you know, what the taillight pieces, and then we'll have somebody else from the crime lab who's going to talk about, you know, what happened when they actually tested them.
Right. Okay, let's just talk about who else testified this week. Maureen Hartnett from the crime lab, Sergeant Brian Gallerani from Needham Police just talked about doing DNA swabs of Buchanan and Proctor, Trooper Evan Brent from State Police, Trooper Zach Clark from State Police, John O'Keefe's niece, Sergeant Yuri Buchanan, and that's it. Because there were only 3 days, we had an unexpected day off.
Right.
Does anybody stand out to you for either side of this case from those witnesses?
You know, you know, it's difficult. I think that with the niece's testimony, obviously not being in the courtroom and not hearing it or seeing it, it's difficult to really understand, you know, the weight of her testimony. But, you know, I think again that puts a personal sort of face to it in the middle of, to follow up after Uri Buchanan. And then, so she's sort of sandwiched between, some of the experts and more technical witnesses. But I think that probably out of all weeks that we've had so far, this is probably the driest. So the state police, the troopers that testified, who were in crime scene, and the photos that they took. And obviously they were questioned by defense about, their relationship with Michael Proctor, what they did with him, things like that. So with every, really police witness, the defense's job is to sort of tie Proctor back in. And it was interesting that they called the Needham police officer, because to me, I had to think about, as a juror, it almost seems like out of the blue. Like, what are
it was
like? What are we talking about? And why is their DNA being swabbed for
right?
what?
He just said he swabbed the two state troopers, Buchanan and Proctor, and didn't even say what the results of the swab were.
Right.
Connection to anything.
Right. So that was probably one of the few things that made me just kind of question from Brennan, because I don't know that we all know what that was, that they were tested against the DNA, but it seems to be like a pretty random piece of information to put into the jury. So pretty some monotonous stuff this week, not as interesting, but that's what happens with jury trials, is that you have witnesses, civilian witnesses, who are often, they're a little bit more interesting to watch, but some of probably the most important witnesses are coming up.
Right. Oh, what did I want to ask you about? Oh, yeah, we've talked about this a few days now. Now it's been all week. Karen Reed has no longer made comments to the media. I've asked you about this a ton of times, but you assume this is a strategy now?
Well, I it's difficult to figure out what their strategy is, to be honest, because it's just not been consistent with what most defendants do in any criminal trial. But I did see at one point, I don't know if it was yesterday or maybe before that, but her dad spoke outside of court. So, you wonder, is Mr. Reed now taking the position of sort of the surrogate for Karen? And I just think that I don't know that the public, outside of, her avid supporters, Mr. Reed's avid supporters, I'm not sure that it lands as well with her speaking instead of her attorneys. And it's not adding anything, it's not helping them, so they might have just decided that it's best for her to just not say anything, which is the norm.
So just based on timing, what do you think is coming up next week? Do you think the Commonwealth will take the whole week, or do you think they'll wrap up their case?
Well, if we think, so today's Thursday, if we finish up with the medical examiner, if we have the accident reconstructionist, the neurosurgeon, the state police technicians, because there's a lot of, pieces, there's a lot of analysis, that might take a little bit of time. But
Yeah.
I mean, I think there's definitely a world where the Commonwealth can wrap up their case by the end of the week, of next week.
Okay. So maybe things are moving along. Maybe it is a quicker trial than the last one.
Well, and I've been thinking a lot too, Kristina, about the fact that last time we saw a longer case for the Commonwealth on the front end and then the defense. But I think there's a strong likelihood that Attorney Brennan puts on some form of rebuttal case. So I have to wonder, what he's done a lot strategically is to hold some of his questions for crossing I apologize, for redirect. So when he calls a witness and then he knows they're going to be crossed on something specific, he kind of holds diving into it on direct, and then he waits until redirect. So I imagine that in some ways he's doing the same thing with the rebuttal case, that there are some witnesses that might be helpful to the case. But if you don't call them in your case in chief, allow the defense to raise it, and then you can rebut it, you have sort of more control about the timing in which it goes to the jury and being closer to the last word. So I wouldn't be surprised that if if the Commonwealth rests next week, but then they have more witnesses that we'll hear from on the back end.
Interesting. Well, thank you. I don't think I have anything else. So
No, you have a law school graduation to get ready for.
Yes, I have other things to do. Thank you everybody for watching. We'll be back with Katherine, well, every day, but also next week for another podcast. So thank you.
Thanks, guys.
See you soon. Bye.